As the sun sets on the quiet town of Adams, Tennessee, an eerie hush falls over the land. The trees sway in the breeze and the crickets chirp in the distance, but there's a feeling in the air that something isn't quite right. It's as if an unseen force is watching, waiting, and ready to strike at any moment. This feeling isn't new to the residents of Adams. They've grown up hearing the stories of the Bell Witch, a malevolent entity that haunted the town over 2 centuries ago. The witch was said to have terrorized the Bell family, causing strange noises and unexplained phenomena in their home. But the Bell Witch wasn't content with just one family. She continued to haunt the town for years, tormenting anyone who crossed her path. Despite attempts to unravel the mystery of the Bell Witch hauntings, it continues to remain an enigma to this day. And one thing is certain, her presence still lingers in the sleepy town of Adams, and those who dare to investigate her story do so at their own peril. The Bell Witch is one of the most famous ghost stories in American history. It centers around the Bell family who lived in Adams, Tennessee in the early 19th century. According to legend, the witch haunted the family for years, tormenting them with poltergeist activity and even physical attacks. The story of what happened to the Bell family 200 years ago is unsettling and terrifying, to be sure. But it lingers, not just because it's a good ghost tale, but because it's built around a series of anxieties that have come to define much of American culture, about what happens when a patriarch loses control of his family, when religions come into conflict, and what takes place out on the borderlands between civilization and the wild. The Bell family was a prominent family in the town of Adams, Tennessee in the early 19th century. John Bell Sr., the patriarch of the family, was a farmer and landowner who served as a deacon in the local church. He was married to Lucy Bell, and together they had 9 children. John Bell Jr., they called Jack, the oldest son, Drury Bell, another son, Jesse Bell, another son, Benjamin Bell, another son, and Betsy Bell, their only daughter. All the children were said to have experienced the happenings, but Betsy was particularly targeted by the Bell Witch. The haunting began sometime in 1817, when John Bell witnessed the apparition of a strange creature resembling a dog. Bell fired at the animal, but it disappeared. John's son, Drew Bell, approached an unknown bird perched on a fence that flew off and was of extraordinary size. The daughter, Betsy, observed a girl in a green dress swinging from the limb of an oak tree. Dean, a person enslaved by the Bell family, reported being followed by a large black dog on evenings that he visited his wife. Activity soon moved to the Bell household, with knocking heard along the doors and walls, and the family heard sounds of gnawing on the beds and invisible dogs fighting and chains along the floor. The family reported seeing objects move around the house on their own. The family also felt that they were being watched, and they would often hear the sound of a woman's voice singing hymns. As time went on, the Bell Witch's activity became more aggressive. Soon the entity pulled hair and scratched the children, with particular emphasis on Betsy, who was slapped and pinched and stuck with pins. She would also pull the covers off the children's bed at night and stuff them under their beds. She would also torment John Bell Sr., causing him to experience strange numbing sensations in his mouth and throat and making it difficult for him to speak. The Bell family tried a number of remedies to rid themselves of the witch's presence. They consulted with various doctors and ministers, and they even performed exorcism in an attempt to banish the witch. The Bells soon turned to family friend James Johnston for help. After retiring for the evening at the Bell home, Johnston was awakened by the night by the same phenomena. That morning, he told John Bell it was a spirit, just like in the Bible. Soon word of the haunting spread, with some traveling great distances to see the witch. The apparition began to speak out loud and was asked, "Who are you and what do you want?" And the voice answered feebly, "I'm a spirit, and I was once very happy, but I have been disturbed." The spirit offered diverse explanations of why it had appeared, tying its origin to the disturbance of a Native American burial mound located on the property, and sent Drew Bell and Bennett Porter on an unproductive search for buried treasure. With the emergence of full conversations, the spirit repeated word for word 2 sermons given 13 miles apart at the same time. The entity was well acquainted with biblical text and appeared to enjoy religious arguments. As another amusement, the witch shared gossip about activities in other households and at times appeared to leave for brief moments to visit homes after an inquiry. John Johnston, a son of James, devised a test for the witch, something no one outside his family would know, asking the entity what his Dutch step-grandmother in North Carolina would say to the slaves if she thought they did something wrong. The witch replied with his grandmother's accent, "Hut, tut, what has happened now?" And in another account, an Englishman stopped to visit and offered to investigate. On remarking on his family overseas, the witch suddenly began to mimic his English parents. Again, in the early morning, the witch woke him to voices of his parents, worried as if they had heard his voice as well. The Englishman quickly left that morning and later wrote to the Bell family that the entity had visited his family in England. He apologized for his skepticism. At times, the spirit displayed a form of kindness, especially towards Lucy, John Bell's wife, the most perfect woman to walk the earth. The witch would give Lucy fresh fruit and sing hymns to her and showed John Bell Jr. a measure of respect. Referring to John Bell Sr. as Old Jack, and the witch claimed she intended to kill him and signaled this intention through curses and threats and afflictions. Betsy Bell was one of the Bell's family children and played a central role in the Bell Witch legend. Born in 1806, Betsy was a spirited and intelligent young woman who was well liked in her community. Betsy was one of the first members of the Bell family to experience the witch's presence. She reported hearing strange scratching sounds on her bedpost at night, and she would often find her hair tied in knots when she woke up in the morning. Betsy also reported feeling as if she was being pinched and slapped by unseen forces, and she would often wake up with red marks all over her skin. As the witch's activity grew more intense, Betsy became the focus of much of her anger. The witch would often taunt Betsy and calling her names and threatening to kill her. Betsy also reported hearing the witch's voice whispering in her ear, and she would often wake up in the middle of the night to find the witch standing at the foot of her bed. Despite the witch's torment, Betsy remained resolute and determined to rid her family of the witch's presence. Betsy worked with her father and other members of the family to try to find a solution, and she even consulted with a local school teacher named Richard Powell, who was said to have had experience with witchcraft. Betsy's story is one of the most tragic and compelling parts of the Bell Witch legend. Like most such stories, certain details vary from version to version. But the prevailing account is that it was the spirit of Kate Batts, a mean old neighbor of John Bell, who believed she was cheated by him in a land purchase. On her deathbed, she swore she would haunt John Bell and his descendants. The legend is even picked up by the Guidebook for Tennessee, published in 1933 by the federal government's Work Project Administration. Whatever it was, it didn't stay in the forest or the fields. At first a pleasant curiosity and devoutly religious, the entity soon turned sour, insulting John and trying to interfere with Betsy's love life and gossiping and spewing racist insults at the black people the Bells enslaved. The entity became legend. Everyone in Red River knew of Bell's resident spirit, Ingram's telling explained, and visitors came from all over to bear witness, including war hero and future President Andrew Jackson, who spent a night with his men attempting to draw out the spirit. Sure enough, tradition says, the Bells were tormented for years by the malicious spirit of old Kate Batts. No one ever saw her, but every visitor to the Bell home heard her all too well. Her voice, according to one person who heard it, spoke at a nerve-wracking pitch when displeased, and while at other times it sang and spoke in low musical tones. The spirit of old Kate led John and Betsy Bell a merry chase. She threw furnitures and dishes at them. She pulled their noses and yanked their hair and even poked needles into them. She yelled all night to keep them from sleeping and even snatched food from their mouths at mealtime. So widely spread was the news about the Bell Witch that people came from hundreds of miles around hoping to hear the spirit's shrill voice or witness a manifestation of its vile temper. When word of the haunting reached Nashville, one of its most famous citizens, General Andrew Jackson, decided to gather a party of friends and journey to Adams to investigate. The general, who had earned his tough reputation in many conflicts with Native Americans, was determined to confront the phenomenon and either expose it as a hoax or send that spirit away. A chapter in M.V. Ingram's 1894 book, an authenticated history of the famous Bell Witch, considered by many to be the best account of the story, is devoted to Jackson's visit. General Jackson's party came from Nashville with a wagon loaded with a tent, provisions, and etc., bent on a good time and much fun investigating the witch. The men were riding on horseback and were following along in the rear of the wagon as they approached near the place, discussing the matter and planning how they were going to go do up the witch. Just then, traveling over a smooth, level piece of road, the wagon halted and stuck fast.
The driver popped his whip, whooped, and shouted to the team, and the horses pulled with all their might, but could not move that wagon an inch. It was dead stuck, as if welded to the earth. General Jackson commanded all men to dismount and put their shoulders to the wheels and give the wagon a push, but all in vain. It was no go. The wheels were then taken off, one at a time, and examined and found to be all right, revolving easily on the axles. General Jackson, after a moment's thought, realizing that they were in a fix, threw up his hands, exclaiming, "By the eternal, boys, it is the witch." Then came the sound of a sharp metallic voice from the bushes saying, "All right, boys, let the wagon move on, and I will see you again tonight." The men, in bewildered astonishment, looked in every direction to see if they could discover from whence came that strange voice, but could find no explanation to the mystery. The horses then started unexpectedly on their own accord, and the wagon rolled along as light and smoothly as ever. According to some versions of the story, Jackson did indeed encounter the Bell Witch that night. Betsy Bell screamed all night from the pinching and slapping that she received from the witch, and Jackson's covers were ripped off as quickly as he could put them back on, and he had his entire party of men slapped and pinched and had their hair pulled by the witch until morning, when Jackson and his men decided to hightail it out of Adams. Jackson was later quoted as saying, "I'd rather fight the British in New Orleans than to have to fight the Bell Witch." The torment of the Bell House continued for years, culminating in the ghost's ultimate act of vengeance upon the man that she claimed had cheated her, and she took responsibility for his death. In October of 1812, John Bell Sr. was struck with an illness while walking to the pigsty of his farm. Some believe he suffered a stroke, since thereafter he had difficulty speaking and swallowing. In and out of bed for several weeks, his health declined. The Tennessee State University in Nashville, Tennessee, tells this part of the story. On the morning of December 19th, John Bell Sr. failed to awake at his regular time. When the family noticed that he was sleeping unnaturally, they attempted to rouse him. They discovered that John was in a stupor and he couldn't be completely awakened. John Jr. went to the medicine cupboard to get his father's medicine, and he noticed it was gone, with a strange vial in its place. No one claimed to have replaced the medicine with the vial. A doctor was soon summoned to the house. The witch began taunting that she had placed the vial in the medicine cabinet and had given John a dose of it while he slept. The contents of the vial were tested on a cat and discovered to be highly poisonous. John Bell Sr. died on December 20th. Kate was quiet until after the funeral. After the grave was filled, the witch began singing loudly and joyously. This continued until all friends and family left the gravesite. The ghost said it would reappear 107 years later in 1935, but if she did, no one in Adams came forward as a witness to it. Some claim that the spirit still haunts the area. On the property once owned by the Bells is a cave, which has since become known as the Bell Witch Cave, and many locals claim to have seen strange apparitions there and at other spots on the property. A few rational explanations of the Bell Witch phenomena have been offered over the years. The haunting, they say, was a hoax perpetrated by Richard Powell, the school teacher of Betsy Bell and Joshua Gardner, with whom Betsy was in love with. It seems Powell was deeply in love with the young Betsy and would do anything to destroy her relationship with Gardner. Through a variety of pranks and tricks, and with the help of several accomplices, it's theorized that Powell created all of the effects of the ghost to scare Gardner away. Indeed, Gardner was the target of much of the witch's violent taunting, and he eventually did break up with Betsy and left the area. It has never been satisfactorily explained how Powell achieved all these remarkable effects, including paralyzing Andrew Jackson's wagon. But he did come out the winner. He married Betsy Bell. Hauntings and the stories that they spawn require some kind of supernatural explanation. And over the years, many of them end up getting real world explanations, like mental illness or a desire for attention or a natural phenomenon misinterpreted. There's no consistent narrative for why the family was plagued, and no simple moral for audiences a century later. As such, modern tellers of the story have put their own spin on it. In addition to the films and books, dozens of paranormal podcasts have devoted episodes to the Bell Witch, and nearly every one of them offers a different explanation. Some insist that the Bell Farm was on Native American burial ground. Another popular interpretation focuses on a school teacher named Richard Powell, who supposedly wanted to marry Betsy Bell and conjured up the witch and all the paranormal happenings. And many conclude that Kate Batts, an unpleasant, by all accounts, and unmarried woman, was a scapegoat, a version that taints the story with misogyny. These are at best conjectures, and none of them feel definite. It's hard not to be frustrated because we're hardwired to want answers. Ghost stories are stories, after all, and we want them to carry some kind of meaning, message, or moral. Is there one in the tale of the Bell Witch? As with many things haunted, sometimes you have to go beneath the floorboards for an answer. Despite the many attempts to explain the strange occurrences that took place in the Bell Farm in the early 19th century, we are left with more questions than answers. Was it a poltergeist, a malevolent spirit, or something else entirely? We may never know for sure. So what do you guys think? Did the Bell family really experience supernatural events? Or is this story just a product of folklore and myth? Thank you guys for watching another episode of Tales Told in the Dark. Alright guys, please leave me a comment after you've watched it. I really enjoy my comments. And please, if you liked it, hit that like, share it out. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more. I will see you guys next time.